Blessed are the eyes that see what you see. For I tell you, many kings and prophets have desired to see what you see, and have not seen it. To hear what you hear, and have not heard it. I thank you, Father, for hiding these things from the learned and the wise, and revealing them to the innocent and the simple.
A spectacular display by Mexico's Popocatépetl volcano, spewing out huge clouds of ash and smoke high into the air. A giant grey column reaching up into the sky just 50 miles southeast of the capital, Mexico City. Experts say the ash and smoke rose 2,500 meters above the volcano's crater. According to Mexico's National Center for Disaster Prevention, there were more than 40 exhalations reported. This most recent activity comes on the back of a series of rumblings at the massive volcano in the past few months. There are more than 3,000 volcanoes in Mexico, although just 14 of them are considered active.
NATO has once again voiced concern over Russia's military involvement in Syria. NATO Deputy Secretary General Alexander Vershbow says since Moscow's objectives in Syria differ from those of the US and its allies, his airstrikes in the Arab country creates the risk of, quote, an incident getting out of control. The Western alliance is angry at the Kremlin for targeting militants fighting against the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Moscow's airstrikes in Syria have further strained its ties with NATO members. The military alliance has stepped up its rhetoric against Russia for its alleged violation of Turkey's airspace.
Meanwhile, new video has surfaced claiming to show airstrikes by Russian jets in Aleppo and Homs province in Syria. In Moscow, President Vladimir Putin addressing military officers, insisting Russian actions in Syria are necessary.
Having established a foothold in Syria and some other Middle Eastern countries, the terrorists have built and continue building plans to increase expansion, to destabilize entire regions, have recruited and continue to recruit fighters into their ranks from many countries, including, unfortunately, from Russia and CIS countries.
As Washington continues to accuse Russia of using airstrikes to prop up the Syrian government, Moscow insists its military action is aimed at tackling ISIL and other terrorist organizations in the country.
The United States is the world's strongest military power, but has played a double game. It's always difficult to play a double game, declaring a fight against terrorists while simultaneously trying to use some of them to arrange the pieces on the Middle East chessboard in one's own interests.
Putin said Russia's main objective in Syria is to establish peace.
The Russian president has criticized the United States for continuing to develop its missile system despite the fact that the dispute over Iran's nuclear program has been solved. Vladimir Putin said the reason that spurred the US to build its missile system is gone, but Washington continues to develop the program. He said the US cheated the whole world over Iran's nuclear program. Now the whole world is being misled once again.
In a town north of Manila, the weather hasn't watered down the excitement of playtime for these children. But looking at the height of the waters, it's clear why residents have been evacuated after Typhoon Kopu ripped through the area. Some temporary evacuation centres were inundated with water, leaving evacuees to squeeze in together for space on higher ground. Clemente Gabiana is one of the evacuees staying in a flooded gymnasium. She said she had no option but to evacuate. Some low-lying areas receive up to 4-metre-high floods. More than 100,000 people are still in temporary shelters. The National Disaster Agency estimates that Typhoon Kopu has destroyed more than $140 million worth of crops, infrastructure and homes.
The strongest hurricane ever recorded is set to hammer Mexico's Pacific coast. Millions of people are bracing for Category 5 Patricia. It's already packing wind speeds up to 200 miles per hour. Mexico's weather authority says the coast could see waves nearly 40 feet high. The hurricane is reportedly as big as Typhoon Haiyan. That storm left more than 7,000 people dead or missing in the Philippines.
One of the strongest hurricanes in history has made landfall on Mexico's southwestern coast on Friday. The hurricane brought strong winds and heavy rains, with waves raging as 8 meters high off the coast of Jalisco, Colima, and Michoacan. The maximum sustained winds were 335 kilometers per hour, with gusts of up to 400 kilometers per hour. And damage from the Category 5 storm is expected to be devastating. Billboards and trees were toppled as the hurricane lashed inland through Jalisco and Colima. Approximately 400,000 people remain in the affected areas. Mexican authorities had evacuated more than 50,000 people from the area, and tourists in resorts sought shelter.
It's been raining across most of Texas since yesterday morning. Storms that had nothing to do with the hurricane are expected to last until Sunday.
More than 4 inches of driving rain turned roadways into waterways in parts of North Texas today. Near Waco, a section of Interstate 35, one of the nation's busiest highways, was temporarily closed after this 18-wheeler hit a medium and overturned. This round of weather is the latest in a storm system that saturated the state.
Double wide's floating. There goes double wide, gone.
In West Texas, runoff washed away this mobile home. Floodwaters swallowed up this ambulance in Odessa and prompted at least 30 swift water rescues in the area. The fast-moving rainstorm swamped low-lying streets in Dallas, forcing some drivers to wade through several feet of water. The storm also toppled trees in its path and knocked out power to as many as 20,000 residents. A lightning strike sparked this house fire, but the 4 people inside were able to get out.
This is Homs on Friday, the 23rd of October. The video was uploaded to a social media website and appears to show the moment an airstrike hits the northern countryside of Homs in Syria. A voice on the video is heard saying, "God is the greatest. The city of Talbize is being targeted by warplanes." Amid the panic, the search for survivors under layers of rubble has today, and since the start of the war in Syria, turned this neighborhood into a graveyard. Another clip purports to show the body of a child killed in the airstrike. The voice on the video identifies the body as a baby girl and says she was martyred as a result of the warplane bombardments targeting the city of Talbize.
Palestinian factions have called for mass rallies against Israel in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem in a day of rage. Meanwhile, world and regional powers are continuing with talks to try to end more than 3 weeks of bloodshed. Hours after the announcement, the Israeli military said a Palestinian stabbed and wounded an Israeli soldier in the West Bank. 60 people have been killed in the violence, mostly Palestinians who were shot by Israeli forces. Israeli authorities lifted restrictions on Friday that had banned men under the age of 40 from going to the Flashpoint Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in Jerusalem's Old City. The move was seen as a bid to ease Muslim anger.
Palestinians have once again poured out into the streets amid rising tensions in the occupied territories. They demand an end to Israeli provocations in Jerusalem Al-Quds, as well as an end to their decades-long occupation. Our correspondent Mohammed Hamayel reports from outside the Beit El settlement near Ramallah, where a peaceful protest escalated into clashes.
Israeli military forces have escalated their campaign against Palestinians in Al-Quds. They locked down the city with concrete blocks and arrested 26 Palestinians, including minors. The city of Bethlehem was also locked down with concrete blocks prohibiting Palestinians from easy access within the city. In the city of Hebron, also known as Al-Khalil, dozens of Palestinian protesters were arrested. However, despite the intensified Israeli crackdown, Palestinians pledged to continue their uprising.
We have come here this Friday the same way we come here any other day. We are here to support our brothers in occupied Al-Quds. This Friday of anger is a message to Benjamin Netanyahu that his plane and his tanks do not terrorize us. We are here to resist Israeli aircraft and tanks using our bare hands.
The Popular Resistance Committees say they're disappointed with the U.S. administration's stance and will no longer wait for the international community to step in. A spokesperson for the Popular Resistance Committees has called for further protests against Israel.
After the failure of the international community to act responsibly and the US administration's stance, which is biased toward Israel, our only option is to unite and escalate these protests. This way, we can reclaim our rights and push the world to pressure Israel to put an end to the occupation and its crimes.
The protests have been ongoing for 3 weeks, with scores of Palestinians killed and hundreds injured by the Israelis. Palestinian authorities say the number of casualties could further rise as there were violent clashes in Al-Khalil, Bethlehem, and Nablus.
Saudi fighter jets continue bombing different locations throughout Yemen. A woman was killed and several others wounded as Saudi jets bombarded multiple residential areas in Sa'ada province. Warplanes launched 3 airstrikes on Ma'rib province as well. They also pounded at Taiz province. Yemeni sources say that Saudi helicopters and warships targeted the islands of Aqban and Khadman in the Red Sea on Friday. At least 40 people, including several fishermen, were killed in the attacks. Riyadh started its relentless air campaign against Yemen in late March. More than 7,000 people have been killed and many more injured since.
Kosovo in Serbia. Hundreds of refugees were waiting in the cold early on Saturday, waiting to cross the Serbian-Croatian border, feeling helpless and freezing.
And there is no care in the road. A little few help. That's bad. And very cold on the road, and I have children and I have a weak woman. Nobody help us. She can't walk, she works. So we are now, it's okay because we arrived here. Thanks God. Nobody dead. Not cold, freezing. Do you know freezing? Freezing. Yeah. All of us freezing. Yeah.
A UNHCR official says as many as 3,000 crossed the border into Croatia overnight, bringing the total to 6,000 in 24 hours. Serbian and Croatian police joined efforts to ensure orderly crossings of people in groups of 50s and hundreds. Once they enter Croatia, refugees have to live in the camps until they are registered, after which they can move on towards Western Europe.
All feel cold, but nobody feel what we feel. Have a lot of United Nations help and UN, but even help, nobody can feel what we feel.
Many European countries have tried to keep order in border areas, but still some refugees lose contact with their families. A Croatian migrant tracing service is working hard to reunite them.
The most common situation where a family split happens is when large groups of people are in one place, when it gets crowded. Then in that crowd, families split and later it becomes difficult for them to find their family members. Most of the time, the ones that get lost are children.
When a child is lost, volunteers, human rights activists and translators spread through refugee camps looking for clues on their location.
2 bomb blasts ripped through mosques in northeast Nigeria on Friday, killing at least 55 people and injuring more than 100 others as Boko Haram fighters briefly seized a town in neighboring Cameroon. The first bombing happened shortly after 5 a.m. local time in the Borno state capital of Maiduguri. Nigeria's National Emergency Management Agency says 6 people were killed and 17 others injured, while hospital sources put the death toll at 19. The second bombing occurred at around 2 p.m. at a mosque in Yola. The NEMA said at least 27 people were killed in the explosion. Boko Haram wants to create a hardline Islamic state in northeast Nigeria and has previously targeted mosques and religious leaders who don't share their extremist ideology.